Hey, it's Steve here, and in this short video I want to do a summary or an overview, an introduction to thyroid physiology. So this is just to give you a base understanding of how we make thyroid hormone and the different mechanisms involved. So what you'll see just from this diagram, just to make things a little bit easier, is that there is a number of steps involved, and this is kind of almost in a sense a communication pathway. Now, the starting point for our body to be able to make thyroid hormone comes from the brain. So we rely upon the hypothalamus and the pituitary glands in the brain to send messages to allow for us to make thyroid hormone. So initially the hypothalamus makes something called thyrotropin releasing hormone, and that stimulates the pituitary gland to make thyroid stimulating hormone. So some of you might be quite aware of thyroid stimulating hormone because it's a very common marker that would be assessed on blood chemistries, especially if you're having your thyroid investigated in any way. So classically what they'll do is they'll look at thyroid stimulating hormone on a blood test, and if the levels are high, that's indicative of there being a hypothyroid state, and if the levels are low or very low, that might be indicative of there being a hyperthyroid state. Now, thyroid physiology is a bit more complex than just looking at TSH alone, so it's often a really good idea that you actually have a slightly more extended panel. So what we then get is we get the pituitary gland itself makes this thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulates the thyroid gland to make around 93% thyroid hormone T4 and around 7% thyroid hormone T3. Now, T3 is your more active form of thyroid hormone. It's the one that really has a significant effect on your cells and your metabolism. Okay, so what the body will do is it makes predominantly T4, and then it's able to convert that T4 into T3 through a couple of different mechanisms which I'll go into. Before that though, what we need to be aware of is that the body actually makes binding proteins, and these binding proteins can act as carriers for thyroid hormone T4 and T3. If we didn't have these binding proteins, then we would just make a bunch of available thyroid hormone which would just act on the cells in and around the thyroid gland, which wouldn't really help us out in other areas of the body and other systems in the body. So with these binding proteins, and assuming that we're making good levels of T4 and T3, the next step is that we can actually convert some of that T4 into T3. The large majority of that conversion process takes place actually in the liver. Now what you'll see here is that we make T3, can also make reverse T3, which is an inactive form of thyroid hormone. And then we also make something called T3 sulfate and T3 acetic acid. Now, these are also inactive as well. But what is super interesting is that via the gut, we're actually able to convert these two types of T3 that have been produced into active thyroid hormone T3. Then what we're left with is the conversion that's taken place in the liver, conversion that has taken place in the gut. We have more available T3 now, which is actually able to then act upon the cell and create its biological effect on the body. So what you'll see from this is that we actually have, starting in the brain, we need certain processes to take place, a communication system between the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and then a communication between the pituitary and also the thyroid gland itself. Once the thyroid gland has got the message, and depending on how much thyroid stimulating hormone is being produced, will then dictate ideally how much T4 and T3 is being produced, assuming that everything is working well. Then we have some conversion that goes on. We also have some binding proteins that help carry these hormones around the body as well. So this just gives you a very kind of basic introductory overview into thyroid metabolism and how we produce thyroid hormone. In future videos, we're just going to look at maybe some of the dysfunctions that go on, and in other articles we can look at the maybe some testing that you'd want to look for and symptoms that you might want to look out for that might indicate that there might be a thyroid issue.